Hey friends, I'm wanting to do a dispatch today outside, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to hear myself think with the chickens going off and the birds. We'll see, I'll give it a shot. So this is a dispatch. I had intended to do dispatches every 2 weeks. As many of you know, who have been following me for a while, I used to send out content a lot more consistently, and I went through a divorce 3 years ago, and so my entire life basically broke into smithereens, and I've been building a new foundation for quite some time now, and have had to put a lot of my energy into the more immediate needs of making quite a bit more money. And so I've been doing a lot of body work. I just actually gave a session today to a woman who, my God, these birds are loud, to a woman who has chronic migraine. There's 3 different kinds of birds singing here. I'm gonna go on a walk up the hill. There's another bird. Those blue jays are really obnoxious. Okay. So this entire time that my life has been reorganizing itself, I of course have not forgotten about you. And I get women on my massage table very frequently who are in tons of pain, whether that's migraine or something else. And so I'm constantly asking myself this question: how to help people with migraine, how to help women, how to help people who are in pain, how to live a more balanced life for myself, how to teach my sons how to be optimally healthy, how to help my community thrive, how to rehabilitate this sick culture. The culture that I live in, I feel, is very sick, at a stage of quite an amount of fragmentation and suppressive medicine, and the list could go on and on. I think I've ranted enough about that in previous videos. So the task is rather monumental. It's what I came here in this life to do. Not to solve all the world's problems, but to inquire through the lens of my own life into this question of what healing is, how do we do it given the limitations that exist in our lives, what are the biggest leverage points, and again, how, as I always say, how are these health challenges something that can be used as an initiation into a more authentic way of living that's in deeper alignment with who you really are, what you're here to do, what you want in your life. And those are some big questions, and there's so much value just in asking the right questions and then waiting for the answer. We don't always have to know the answers right away. This is definitely something I found, and my questions have led me to a lot of solutions. I think there's something about the way the universe works that the sheer authenticity and purity of our inquiry attracts the type of answers that we need. I believe the universe is extraordinarily sensitive and caring in this way. And when we really go through these dark nights of the soul, they teach us that. So, of course, I want to keep sharing everything I've been learning in my own dark nights of the soul. And like I mentioned before, I think going through migraine really helped me to have a lot of resiliency and a pretty strong anchoring in myself through the transitions I needed to go through in the past few years, which I know, for me, they just express themselves in their own unique flavor for what I as a soul needed to go through. But I'm by no means alone in the level of upheavals that have been occurring. Oh my gosh. Humanity right now, just in general, is really going through it, right? So many levels of upheaval and reorganization occurring. And so I just want to reflect a little bit today about, first of all, as someone who does not suffer chronic migraine anymore, but who still has the personality type and the nervous system type and the constitutional type, as well as the type of person who has some physical handicaps, such as I have scoliosis, and that affects my liver's ability to detoxify. So I still very much have the patterning of this type. It's just that I've learned how to tend to and manage my constitution very well in such a way that I don't have symptoms, by inviting my symptoms to invite me into a better understanding of how to care for myself, right? So part of this caring for myself that it's taken me a really long time, I'm almost 50, it's taken me a really long time to learn how to not be so hard on myself. And it's been really cool in the past few years, as you've noticed with my brand, to just really realize that in this reorganization of my life, the high standards that I set for myself in terms of how I would like to show up for my brand and show up for you sometimes are forced to be let go of. And that I think it's hard for those who have the migraine type, who are very driven and feel very obliged, to actually learn how to be less consistent. And I mean, I guess I don't want to say that as an absolute statement. I just want to say that this relentless tendency to be hard on ourselves and to have very high standards and expectations, it's not that there's anything wrong with that, especially if it's coming from an internal sense of the integrity of showing up in a way that's in alignment with our values. However, many of us go through our life really operating primarily from the drive of other people's values, right? So, you know, the value of making consistent income with my business. Look at this beautiful feather I just found on the ground. You know, these sort of injected values, as Dr. DeMartini would put it, that create pressure for us. It's not that we can go through life not caring at all about the value system of our broader culture, but when that's almost all that we're driven by, that becomes problematic. So, well, it just creates a lot of pressure. And then along with that pressure, if we're operating mostly from other people's values, there's also going to be a resistance to that, because to the extent that those outer values are a little bit at odds with what we would really prefer to be doing, it's going to create resistance, right? And so another part of like the migraine personality type is not only a lot of people pleasing and a lot of drive, being driven by others' values and the tension that causes within oneself, the resistance, but also just like resistance in general, like resistance as a way of life, resistance almost to the point where we become unconscious because it's so normal for us to realize the degree to which we're resisting, whether that's resisting pain or, like for me, I've been an advocate and an activist much of my life. Much of that activism comes from a place of resistance. We want a better world, right? And so a lot of this idealism of how things could be also creates resistance to what is. And a lot of our deepest desires for how we really want the world to be in our life to be can create resistance to what is. So I've been learning a lot about how, well, one reason we resist what is, especially what has happened already, which you could say is our fate, is because it's like we think that if we stop resisting, we're somehow sanctioning things or values that we don't prefer. So let me just give the example of like my divorce. I don't prefer that my family be shattered and broken apart. I think that a cohesive family unit is one of the most beautiful things that exists on the planet. In a world of fragmentation, more divorce isn't really what I, think is an elegant or intelligent solution. However, my husband divorced me in part because he didn't have like a template for cohesive partnership and had a lot of trauma. And it was my fate to marry someone who could not show up in partnership in the way that I understood it. And I've spent years resisting this. And that inner resistance creates a lot of tension and a lot of heat. And I've finally come to some peace around this as someone who's constitutionally oriented or inclined towards a lot of resistance. I've started to reach some real peace around the events of my life. And a lot of that has come through family constellation therapy. So I might go into that in a little bit here. But all of this is just to say that the migraine constitution has a lot of resistance, but the person who has that constitution may not be aware of it because they live in it so much. Or it could just be the circumstances of your life. Like maybe you're actually accommodating a lot of people, not resisting a lot, you are, self-abandoning and serving a lot of people, but there's just a lot of resistance and tension in your life because maybe you're a mother, and mothers live in chaos, especially when raising young children. And there's not a lot of support and resiliency and nourishment in the system. And I certainly think that's part of what's going on as well. So if we have a system that has a lot of resistance, which requires a lot of energy, and then on top of that, there are toxins in our system or we're nutritionally depleted, that's a really bad situation to be in. So reducing the amount of energy expenditure that we have by having less resistance, which doesn't mean not having any boundaries, and learning how to nourish ourselves and receive. See, I think part of the problem with resistance is because it's a basic lack of receptivity to life. And, obviously you don't want to be receptive to things that are painful or abusive, but I also think that there's a lot of ways that we generate more pain and suffering by resisting things that are just a fact, whether that's the fact that you're having a migraine right now, or whether that's the fact that your marriage fell apart, or whatever the fact is. And so part of the art of healing is like really becoming aware of like where we're going to place our energy, how we're going to orient ourselves, where we're going to save energy by really coming to terms with fate. And the term that they use in family constellation, which is what helped me out with this, is they call it consenting to fate. Now, consenting is pretty much the opposite of resistance, right? So is there, let me give you an example. Is there a way that you can continue to be proactive in addressing your migraine pain at the root cause and taking charge of your destiny, while at the same time consenting to and surrendering to the fact that you were fated to be someone who has chronic migraine? In other words, can you remove some of the inefficiency of resenting the fact that you were fated to be someone with migraine? Can you remove some of the heat generated in the resistance to what you have experienced, which probably, if you're resisting the past, so the fate is what has happened in the past. If you're resisting, for example, that maybe you've suffered from migraine for 5 to 10 years, if you're resisting that, because it's just a fact, there's nothing that can be changed about that. You might be able to change now or in the future, but you can't change that you suffered as long as you did. If you're resisting what happened in the past, you're actually being a victim. And so, while like injustices do happen, people are victimized by certain things. If we take that on as an identity by resisting what is, that's an enormous amount of life force energy that's bound up in something that isn't even happening anymore. I mean, you might still be getting migraines, but what's in the past is in the past, right? And I think I've just personally just found so much groundedness and peace in this concept of consenting to fate. So that came from family constellations. I might do another video on family constellations because I think it's absolutely relevant to this question of healing chronic migraine, because those of us who are very sensitive, another little feather, which people with migraine are, the likelihood that we are taking on the entangled energies, God, there's so many feathers, the entangled energies of unresolved, unintegrated, suppressed stuff from our ancestors that were exiled is very high. And so part of when I speak about efficiency, there's the efficiency of consenting to fate, but there's also the efficiency of realizing that unconsciously, on behalf of a lot of our ancestors, we're holding, those of us who are very sensitive, are holding an enormous amount of tension that's been passed down on behalf of other people and things that other people went through. And the likelihood that we're doing that is much higher if the things that those people went through went unrecognized or was pushed away. Hey there, sweetie. And that's a form of kind of like familial resistance, right? If it wasn't safe to speak up about emotions, or if people just had to power through their pain, or whatever the thing is that got exiled from the family and was told it didn't belong, has to find a place to belong. And so it finds a place in whatever the most sensitive opening is, which happens to be the most sensitive people, right? And so some of the most sensitive people, like myself and you probably, incarnated in a world that didn't necessarily honor their sensitivity. So we learn to survive and adapt by pushing ourselves and maybe trying to please people like our fathers or whoever who were less sensitive, pushing, powering through, while not honoring our exquisite sensitivity. So there creates this inner tension and heat between the exquisite sensitivity that we actually feel and our survival mechanism that tells us we have to push through. That's a mismatch between our survival programming and our authentic selves and the reality of how exquisitely sensitive we are, especially women. So these are just some things that have become clear to me. And one reason I'm thinking about all this so much is because I was talking to this woman who was on the massage table today, who walked in for an 1.5-hour massage and said she had just gotten off of a flight and that she had just recovered from a chronic migraine and that the Botox was helping her quite a bit, but that she knew that it wasn't a root cause solution. And I told her before she got on the table, I said, I have quite a bit of knowledge and information about how to heal migraine naturally, and I just want to mention to you, I have a card and I have a website with a lot of free resources and everything. And she wanted to launch right into talking about all the migraines, and I kept reminding her all that information is available to her after the massage, and that I kept trying to invite her into sinking into the massage. And as she kept wanting to talk about all the details and everything that I knew and kind of, mining my brain for solutions, it became clear to me that she did not want to sink into her body and really receive nourishing support from me physically. Some people are like this. Some people, when they get on the massage table, it's like the hairdresser syndrome. They just want to talk the whole time. And that's one form of decompression. It's one way to relax, right? Women especially, we regulate our nervous systems and we get in touch with our emotions through talking. So I don't want to pathologize that entirely, other than to say that it seemed like there was quite a bit of resistance for her in actually receiving nourishment and support. Sure, she was receiving my insights, but it was like she was in her brain. She was in her mind through the whole massage. And I kept telling her, we can connect on this level, and I'm happy to share information with you, but I just want to remind you that it will affect the quality of your ability to feel this massage. And so I think for those of us who have experienced a lot of pain in our life, being embodied and feeling our body can be a very scary place to be, right? Because some of the pain is so intense that it's like we maybe receive the invitation to dissociate from the body when we have it. And yet then the more we dissociate, the stronger the call from the body has to be. In other words, the more intense the pain symptom in order for it to get our attention, right? So I was just trying to bring the point home to her that healing is a lot about kindness, gentleness to ourselves. She was putting her body down throughout the massage. She was actually speaking very poorly to her body. She said something about her junky bottom or something. It's very bizarre. I was encouraging her to speak kindly to herself. We know that the quality of our thoughts actually affects how structured the water is in our cells. And when you get the update to the circadian biology coursework, I'll be going into that in the water section. This is not pseudoscience. This is proven that coherent thoughts affect the coherency of the water in our cells. Why does that matter? Because migraine is a mitochondrial disease, and the structured water inside our cells is literally the battery. It's what holds the charge in the cell for the mitochondria to work. So if you're feeding it junk food by putting yourself down, pushing yourself, and again, a lot of this is happening unconsciously, you're polluting your cells, probably on a similar level to if you were drinking a bunch of fluoridated water or, getting an injection with some kind of mercury in it or whatever. So anyway, I'm just sharing some of these thoughts with you because I trust that they're relevant. I've been talking for almost 20 minutes right now. But all of this is just another way to say that, like, I know I've been really sporadic in my emails and in running my business because of all the chaos that's been in my life. But I have never stopped inquiring into these questions of how can I be more optimized and how can I share my knowledge, hopefully in a more succinct form. I tend to ramble on a lot. But also to recognize that there are times when I'm inconsistent, and to stop being so hard on myself if I don't always run my business in the most consistent way. And actually, there are certain days where it's more important for me to go sunbathe naked outside on the lawn. I don't say that to be, suggestible, but to realize that, like, what I have to offer and what I have to give comes directly from my embodied experience of applying the insights that I have and really experiencing it as a lived experience, as a way of life, right? So if I've been a little bit absent, it's because I've been really implementing some major, major changes and shifts in my life. Ones that have given me so much power and so much sense of belonging to the world, sense of belonging to myself, sense of honoring and kindness to myself. And this is an ongoing project, that is a lifelong project. That's what I was saying to this woman who was on the massage table today. There are fabulous technologies such as family constellation therapy that can help us so much emotionally. But some of this work of healing chronic illness, just like everyone's work as a human in a body, it's an ongoing spiritual process that doesn't really have an end, right? So we just have to pick and choose which levels we want to work on, what our capacity is. But as we start to feel better and we get these major leverage points working, our capacity increases greatly because there's more coherency in our system, right? And then we can amplify that life force energy and that sense of purpose and authenticity. And that is my deepest prayer and hope, is that the work that I do in the world will allow those of you who have your life force energy bound up right now in resisting pain and in being tortured, to free up that energy for other things, to free up that energy for, honestly, more pleasure and joy in life. And part of, joy isn't happiness. Like, when we think of happiness, it's like, I've got all these things that we want. But I think joy is a much deeper feeling, and it's this ability to just, like, really appreciate all that life throws at us and just, like, really have a very big range of motion for our capacity to respond and listen to what life is asking of us, and to do so in a way that also honors ourselves. So anyway, I'm going to end it there. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. I hope that this was inspiring to you. Stay tuned. I've got stuff recording and uploading into the new coursework, and we'll let you know soon here when that's available. All right, take care.